So, yeah, serious like set downgrade. I lost my chair too. I'm literally sitting in a folding chair right now, and I don't have my props. I kind of lost Wally. This elephant, I still have it. It's literally the only prop I guess I have left. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Winnie High School Biology. My name is Jason Jewick, and today we'll be going over ecosystems and why cycles matter. So today we'll be covering things like ecological organization and how matter and energy cycles through an ecosystem. We'll also look into defining ecological niche and why cycles matter, because matter cycles. So to start with, what is ecology? Well, ecology is the study of how living organisms interact with their environment. It's based on the idea of interdependence, or that living things affect their environments and their environments affect the living things. Well, how exactly? Well, to answer this, we have to look at the levels of ecological organization, or how everything is structured within this system. At the lowest level of ecological organization are individual organisms. Now, individual organisms make up populations, or all the organisms of the same species within a habitat. Now, the populations make up communities. Communities are defined as populations who have species that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. At the next level up is the ecosystem, which is all the abiotic and biotic factors, meaning non-living and living, in an ecosystem or an environment. Now, above that is a biome. Now, all ecosystems fall into the main categories of biomes, which are major global or regional communities which share similar organisms and characteristics like climate, weather, and vegetation. So biomes include examples like temperate rainforests, taigas, tropical rainforests, very similar to things you can find in Minecraft actually, so if you want, go play around in that, you'll get an idea of what a biome is. Finally, at the very top is the biosphere, which comprises of all living organisms and habitable areas on Earth. This typically includes about 8 to 10 kilometers below sea level to 14 to 18 kilometers above sea level, though it has been noted that some bacteria can survive at up to 41 kilometers above sea level, so keep that in mind. Now that we've organized everything and put it in its place, we can look into what a niche is. A niche is an organism's, or actually all of an organism's interactions with its environment. Some things you'll want to remember are the resources it needs, how to get those resources, number of offspring, and a range of tolerable conditions. Now, generalists are species which can tolerate a bunch of conditions and can fill multiple niches within their ecosystems. On the other hand, specialists can only fill 1 or 2 niches and really can't do much beyond that. You should note that we humans are really good at being generalists. We've been able to use most of the planet's resources and a lot more than most other organisms have. Granted, what we do is based on very, fragile systems that stretch across the globe, but nonetheless, we've done a pretty good job at it. On the other hand, we've also done a bad job at it. Speaking of humans, doing a bad job at using up the planet's resources, what we love to mess with? Matter and energy cycles. So matter cycles, scientifically known as biogeochemical cycles, is the transfer of matter between the atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. These include, in no particular order, the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. First, we'll start with the water cycle. So water vapor condenses on airborne particles in the atmosphere to form clouds. This is important to note because you have to realize that water vapor cannot directly just condense out of nowhere. It has to have a surface to condense on to form clouds. So if you want to think of it in this way, clouds are basically giant floating puddles, just really light and fluffy. Then when these clouds become too heavy to support staying airborne, I guess, the water returns to Earth as precipitation. Now, precipitation can happen in one of 4 main ways. The most common you'll be familiar with is rain. So what happens with rain is the ice crystals in the clouds fall to Earth, and as they're falling, they convert into water droplets, and that's what hits the ground is liquid water, and that's why it's called rain. The next form you might not be so familiar with, but many of you probably have heard of it, is sleet. Now, sleet is somewhat of an oddity because the way it forms is it starts out as ice crystals, and it falls through a layer of warmer air, so it becomes partially melted, then falls through another layer of colder air, refreezing it again, and then it hits the ground as kind of like this mushy kind of thing, kind of like the stuff you find in ices, I guess. And that's what makes it sleet. And then another type of precipitation, one that you'll, of course, be more familiar with, is snow. Now, snow is what happens when ice crystals in the cloud, they clump together until they form, those intricate patterns that you're ever so familiar with, snowflakes, and then those fall to Earth. And then the more extreme version of that is hail. Now, hail forms almost exclusively in cumulonimbus clouds because those are the only clouds large enough in the vertical direction to create hailstones. Hailstones are created when ice kind of just clumps together and the winds within a cumulonimbus cloud just whisks them up and down and up and down, and each time they fall back down they gain new ice layers until they become like this hard pellet-like substance. And when it becomes too heavy and the winds can't support it anymore to keep getting new ice layers, it falls to earth and hits the ground as ice, or your head, like it happened to me.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes.
Some precipitation becomes groundwater when it hits the earth and it seeps into underground areas like aquifers and water beds, then flows out to the rivers and oceans where it evaporates again. Other kinds will enter living organisms and then will be released as transpiration or exhalation. And for exhalation, we move on to the carbon and oxygen cycles. These two are linked by cellular respiration and photosynthesis. But to further explain this, let's head to the idea space. So we humans have this immense love for fossil fuels, sometimes known as black gold, because of how valuable of a commodity it is. Without fossil fuels, humans would not be able to do a lot of awesome things, like produce computers for a gaggle of high school students to make videos to teach you about biology. But it comes at a cost. We use the fossil fuels by combusting them, releasing immense amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Granted, current carbon dioxide levels hover at around 0.04% of the atmosphere, and while that seems minimal, 400 parts per million if you understand chemistry, is evidently enough to cause global warming. So stop disbelieving, unless of course you think Mad Max is cool. Heh, cool, get it? That's the oxygen and carbon dioxide cycles in a nutshell and how we humans mess with it. Up next, we'll be talking about the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen is by far the most plentiful gas in Earth's atmosphere, hovering about 78 to 79% of it, in fact. Despite this though, you breathing, like just inhaling air, does not actually take nitrogen in. Your body can't use nitrogen gas in that form. Instead, we have to have it converted in a series of steps through the nitrogen cycle by bacteria. So nitrogen gas is turned into ammonia, or NH3, by nitrogen fixating bacteria. And then the ammonia is turned into ammonium, or NH4, by nitrifying bacteria. Note, you can also get ammonium from excretory material and dead organisms. That's another way it can enter the cycle. Now, ammonium is turned into nitrates, which are nitrogen-containing compounds, by nitrifying bacteria. Now, nitrifying bacteria takes the nitrates and it allows plants to use that. That's a form that plants can use, which then goes into us when we eat the plants. The extra nitrate, however, is returned to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas in a process called denitrification by denitrifying bacteria. So how do we humans test this? Well, we interfere somewhere around the fixation and nitrification phases, where we plant more legumes, which are plants that have extra nitrogen-fixating bacteria in their roots, and these things called nodules, and where we add extra nitrogen to the soil in the form of like fertilizers and things like that. And that leaves us with the final cycle today, the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle happens mainly underground because phosphates are naturally present in rocks and minerals. But we humans mess with this too. When we do mining or agricultural activities, we dig up some of these things from the ground and release extra phosphorus that would have not otherwise been removed. So those are the matter cycles in a nutshell. Now we move on to an introduction on energy cycles. I'll finish up how energy cycles through an ecosystem in the next episode, but today we'll start on it with an example and an analogy, Clash of Clans. So Clash of Clans is a video game, for those of you who are not familiar with it, in which the goal is to boost your military and boost your village defenses using resources that you collect or raid from others. Now this creates a semblance of like an economy within the game, but we can also use this to help demonstrate how energy flows through an ecosystem as well. So energy first enters an ecosystem through first enters the living organisms of an ecosystem through producers. Now producers create energy, or not create energy, but transfer energy from non-organic sources to organic ones in one of two ways: photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. So photosynthesis, which literally means creation by light from Greek, is when plants convert visible light from the sun, artificial light sources, as long as it's visible, and stores that energy in chemicals like glucose, sucrose, fructose, ATP, that sort of thing. I really won't go into detail about how this works since I was first semester and you won't need to know it for this comp, but if you want to know more or if you just want to procrastinate more, I'll post links to how that works here. Anyways, chemosynthesis is the conversion of energy from inorganic molecules like sulfur and methane into energy which is stored in organic molecules, which are typically carbon-based. This usually occurs in like deep sea vents where a lot of minerals are kind of jutted out from there, for organisms to synthesize into chemicals that they can use. In fact, there are whole ecosystems based around that. I can also post more links in the description if you want to procrastinate more by looking at those things. You can think of these producers as like the collectors in Clash of Clans, which produce the stuff that feeds into the rest of the system to create everything. So in this episode, you learned about the levels of ecological organization and matter cycles, also known as biogeochemical cycles. You also started energy cycles and how that flows through an ecosystem. And next time, we'll be finishing up how energy flows through an ecosystem. My name is Jason Jewick, and this has been the first episode of Ecology on Whitney High School Study Guide Biology. And I could have sworn I had an elephant there. Was that moving the whole time?